So I want to talk for a few minutes about regret. And this video was actually inspired by a subscriber of the channel by the name of Sith713 Lord. And Sith Lord actually reached out to me via Instagram when I put out a post on the community tab where I was like, hey, I'm looking for topics and things like that people might want me to cover. And there were a lot of responses. But there were two people that actually messaged me on Instagram that had, I think, a profound effect on me in the sense that it actually sparked a new thought in me and prompted me to spend a little bit of time talking about or thinking about a couple of things that I ultimately wanted to talk about. And in this case, it was my man, Sith713 Lord, who prompted this video about regret. And, his message to me was a really fascinating one because he was like, bro, I have spent, and I'm paraphrasing here, I've emptied the bank account and I bought a book and I don't regret it. And he's like, it is not the first time that I've done it. And again, I am grossly paraphrasing what Sith Lord essentially said. But the takeaway from his message to me on Instagram was that he has had funds available. He has used those funds to buy really big books and, essentially depleted his disposable income, as it relates to comics, and has not regretted that decision because he actually picked up a book or books that were meaningful to him and left him with a feeling of just bliss. and I think that's a wonderful thing. I think it is a wonderful thing when you can actually have money, spend money, and walk away feeling really good about the decision that you've made. And I've done it. I have depleted available resources to me and bought books and have not regretted it at all. And there are many of you out there that are probably listening to this right now that can attest to that you have actually done it and do not regret it, right? Because you probably bought something that was actually meaningful to you. You bought something that you really wanted, that you probably thought about, right? You probably thought about it for a while. You probably had a plan. It was probably part of a goal, right? That you were trying to achieve, whether it would be a wish list or something else that you were trying to do, and you did it and you feel good about it. And I would probably say that there is a lot of you out there that have, done basically the same thing and not had as positive of a feeling as my man Sith Lord had in his situations, right? Because it happens. And this is just an example of just how powerful emotions can be. And I've spent a lot of time on the channel over the last couple of months talking about various emotions that affect us, like fear and fear of missing out, right? That is a very powerful emotion. And regret is to some degree or another just like fear, right? It is a powerful emotion that isn't necessarily bad. It isn't necessarily good. It just is a thing, right? And so regret is definitely something that if you do it and it affects you in a negative way, can linger. It can linger. And part of the question becomes, do you learn anything from the regret that you might feel after buying something that wasn't the right thing to buy? Do you learn something from it? Do you change how you're operating so as to prevent that negative outcome from being realized again? And I think you also have to kind of ask yourself, are there things that you need to do differently as a result? Did you rush into the decision? Did you spend time actually thinking about that particular book and how it fit into your collection? Or did you just have the moment of like inspiration and then you immediately pull the trigger without really giving it some thought? Because the truth of the matter is that that happens to everybody, right? I cannot sit here and say, or stand here, depends on, but I cannot say that I am perfect. Mistakes happen, right? Mistakes happen. Regret happens. I have bought books that I have regretted. I've not bought books and also regretted it, to be completely honest. And the question becomes, are you taking the time to evaluate why you feel the way that you feel, whether you have regret or you don't? Are you taking the time to actually evaluate how you were able to have that type of outcome? Because if you do, then maybe you change something, or maybe you learn from it and you decide to do that thing again because whatever it was that you did actually worked out in your favor. Because regret is okay if we actually learn from it and kind of change our behaviors, right? Or we evaluate what we did and the fact that we did not have regret and realize that we did something right. And then we try to replicate that thing again and again and again because there is a formula there that actually works. And this just goes back to things that I've spoken about before, about the importance of pumping our brakes and taking time to actually think about what it is that we are trying to accomplish versus having that fear of missing out and blowing with the wind and not necessarily having a plan, but having a bias for action that can get us in trouble. And I have a very strong bias for action. I will tell you that. And my bias for action, just like every other skill out there, can be good or bad. It can be overused, and if overused, it will get you in trouble. But when properly applied, a bias for action can be a very good thing, just like fear of missing out is both a good and bad thing. It just depends on how you actually use it. But let's say that you found yourself in a situation in which you have maybe repeatedly had some regret over a purchase that you've actually made. You have to start to ask yourself maybe some questions before you get to that point. Maybe you should ask yourself, why am I buying this book now? Why now? Why is now the time to buy this book? And maybe what you realize is that maybe now isn't the right time. And maybe you realize is that your motivation to actually buy this book is not sound. Maybe you'll realize that you haven't actually taken the time to do the research to figure out whether you should actually buy this book, right? Maybe you just saw a video on YouTube or you got an alert or something like that, and that prompted you to take action. Maybe that's not the right motivation that you actually need. So why now? Maybe what you do is you actually take some time to think about that, and you realize that there is a strong rationale for why now is the right time. And the question becomes, is it something like the value of that particular book is actually increasing? Maybe if the trend of the book that you are thinking about buying is on the upswing and that it's a book that you actually want for your collection, maybe what you realize is that now is the time to buy it before that book actually gets out of reach. And if you come to that conclusion that now is the time to buy because of that, then I think that that's a great reason to actually pull the trigger. Maybe when you're sitting there noodling this book that you're about to buy, maybe what you're thinking is that there is something that is on the horizon that may actually be coming down the pipe. Maybe it is the character is going to appear in a book. Maybe the character is going to appear in a movie or a streaming service. Maybe there is going to be an option that is going to be taken out. Maybe, I don't know. I don't know what the maybe is, but maybe there is, again, something that you are expecting to happen that will prompt you to realize that now is the time to buy. Because here's what I will say to you is that if you are making your buying decisions based upon a video, if you're making your buying decisions based upon an alert, if you're making your buying decisions based upon the hype that is out on the Twitters, then maybe it's too late for you to actually make that buy. Right? Maybe the opportunity, the timing isn't quite right for you to actually pull the trigger. Sometimes one of the best things that you can actually do for yourself is to pump your brakes and slow down. Ask yourself a couple of questions and maybe let one get by you. Maybe sometimes not taking an action is actually the right action to take. Right? Maybe that is the thing. And I'll be honest with you, there is a belief that there's actually a book called Analysis Paralysis, and it's a book that I kind of read through many years ago, Analysis Paralysis. And the principle behind this book is that sometimes you can spend too much time kind of analyzing the situation. You can spend too much time actually thinking through it and crunching the numbers and asking yourself all these questions that you take no action. And by taking no action, you have actually made a decision. And the decision is that you're not going to do anything, right? Maybe that's what could happen. And And that's also not a good thing, right? Not having analysis paralysis is also not a good thing, right? Because again, sometimes analyzing is good, but again, like any skill, if it is overused, it could have a detrimental effect. And so if you are finding yourself analyzing things too much to the point where you are not making any decisions and you are actually missing out on things, that might not be a good position for you to be in either. And as I mentioned at the beginning of this video, I have actually been in a situation where I have regretted not pulling the trigger on certain books that I wish that I had pulled the trigger on. I can be a little cheap sometimes, right? And sometimes because I can be cheap, I will see an opportunity before me and I will say nay. Nay to that opportunity because I feel like I've been spending too much money and sometimes I need to buckle down, and I've found myself to regret that later on. But what can you do about that, right? What can you do about that? Sometimes you miss out. Sometimes you let one get by you and you regret it, but that's also it's not necessarily a bad thing. I've spoken about this before, Amazing Spider-Man 129. This is actually the first appearance of the Punisher. And I bought this book early on when I came back into the hobby. And I was being super cheap at the time because I was newly back into the hobby and I was like just dealing with all of the high prices for comics. I was like, man, this stuff is too expensive. It's too much money, and I was like, I'm gonna spend some money and gonna buy this first appearance of the Punisher, right? Because it was a cool book, yellow cover. Who doesn't love a yellow cover? And I bought a book, and then as I was buying the book, I was having this internal debate of whether I went with a higher grade book or whether I went with the one that I've, had in mind because the price was a comfortable number for me. And I went with comfort. And when I look at that book, I kick myself because I did not spend a couple of extra bucks to actually buy the slightly higher grade, the slightly better book. I kind of regret it. And I think we all, if we really take some time to think about it, we can come up with a lot of examples of where we've had regret, where we've bought something that we shouldn't have purchased, or where we haven't purchased something that maybe we should have. Right? I think that we all probably have those examples because none of us are actually perfect. The goal, whenever possible, is to kind of learn from these things, whether they be good or bad things. I think that there are important lessons that we can take away from these experiences that will actually help us to be better collectors in the future. And at the end of the day, that's what so much of this is about. It's about getting better as collectors. And ultimately, it's about having the best possible collection that one could have that makes sense for you, for me, that doesn't leave us with a ton of regret and certainly with a ton of debt. That is another thing that I think maybe some people struggle with. I think that the fear of missing out in some cases actually motivates people to spend more money than what they actually have at their disposal to be in it, right? To have that book. They may spend a little bit more than what they're supposed to spend, and they may get themselves into some financial trouble. And I've heard, horror stories of people that have done that have used credit cards, that have used rent money, that have used money that they didn't necessarily have in order to have a book that they thought that they should have or that they've always wanted. The fear of missing out was compelling. The alert, the tweet that came out motivated them to take some action that if they had really stopped and thought about it, that maybe they would not have taken those steps. But I think it's vitally important that we all pump our brakes and ask ourselves, what's important? What is it that we really want out of this hobby? What is it that we really want for ourselves? And that's a hard thing, right? Because it's such an individual type of exercise. It's an individual thing that we must each do to evaluate if we are doing the right things. And part of the reason why I'm actually doing this video is because the goal is to actually help people, right? I did a video, I think more than a year ago, on comic book addiction. And I did that video as to whether comics were an addiction, because they are. comic books are an addiction for a lot of people, and people sometimes get themselves into really bad situations. Sometimes people use comics and spending to replace other things in their lives. And so, my goal is to continue to put out content that gets us to think a little bit more, that gives us a couple of things to consider, so that we can all make more informed decisions that ultimately lead to us becoming better collectors, to becoming better members of the comic book community. And so it is in that spirit that I actually record this video, with the hope that it might actually help somebody out there. So I'm going to go ahead and wrap this video up, and or this vlog, I should probably say. I want to wrap this up, and I want to thank you for taking the time to listen. I hope that you enjoyed this content, and maybe, just maybe, it helps someone out there, because that, again, is my goal and my objective. If you need to reach out to me, feel free to do so. You could do it on Instagram, which is my preferred, at Regie Collects, or you can send me an email to reggie@regiecollects.com. Take care.